Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this final afternoon of the IAC 2008 Congress. This is a session that's open to the public. Any of you who still don't know me after this week, I'm Richard Brooke, and as chair of the International Programme Committee, I'm very pleased with the events that we have had so far this week. There have been over 3,000 people at this Congress, from heads of space agencies to politicians to space professionals and to members of the public now here on this afternoon. During this week, we've had a good look at the reality of space in the present day and some prospects for the future. But stealing from our highlight lecture last night, I'm going to say that on this last afternoon, we're going to return to imagination. The Congress is titled From Imagination to Reality, and we're going to go back to imagination and to look at what it is that drives us out into space. We're going to cover science fiction and the romance of space travel and space travel as a canvas for fiction and storytelling and imagination. We're going to cover the prospects for you and I, maybe to go to near space quite soon as tourists. And we're going to ask a panel of professional astronauts and cosmonauts what it's like to be up there on the International Space Station. But I'm not going to do most of the talking this afternoon. As you can hear, my voice is nearly finished. I've asked a couple of people from the Young Professionals group to help me. And I'd like to introduce Kevin Stube and Jessica Culler from the NASA Ames Research Center to come onto the stage. They're members of the Space Generation Advisory Council, and they're going to moderate this afternoon's discussions and question sessions. I'd like to make this as much of a conversation with the audience this afternoon as is possible. So if you have a question, please stick your hand up and don't be afraid to ask it anytime. There are microphones you will see in the aisles, and there will be a lady running around the auditorium here with a handheld mic. Thank you. So, Kevin, over to you. Would you like to introduce our first speaker, or are you going to do it, Jessica? Jessica, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our first panelist and presenter for the day is Dr. Stephen Michael Baxter from Liverpool, England. He's a fellow of the British Interplanetary Society, vice president of the British Science Fiction Association, and a vice president of the H.G. Wells Society. In the last 21 years, he's published over 40 books, mostly science fiction novels, and over 100 short stories. His science fiction novels have been published in the UK, the US, and many other countries, including Germany, Japan, and France. His books have won several awards, including the Philip K. Dick Award, the John W. Campbell Memorial Award, the British Science Fiction Association Award, the Kurt Laschwitz Award from Germany, and the Siyun Award from Japan. He's been nominated for several others, including the Arthur C. Clarke Award, the Hugo Award, and Locus Awards. He's published over 100 sci-fi short stories, several of which have won prizes. Stephen applied to become a cosmonaut in 1991, aiming for the guest slot on Mir, which was eventually taken by Helen Sharman. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Michael Baxter.
Well, thank you very much. I've got to apologise for my voice as well. It's a cold, a French cold, but a cold. Yes, thank you for that kind of introduction. The slogan of the Congress is from imagination to reality, and that's what I want to speak about today. With science fiction as one pole of the imagination end of that equation, and space engineering as the other end. But I don't think from imagination to realities it captures the truth, really. To me, it's a kind of ping-pong game. It's an interaction, a feedback process between the two. Why do I use the word ping-pong as an analogy? Because that was Arthur C. Clarke's favourite sport, at least towards the end of his life. And well, we lost Arthur this year, didn't we? And I had to correct your introduction on one point, which is that I'm now the president of the British Science Fiction Association, not the vice president, because succeeding Arthur. So there you go. I think I'd rather have Arthur back. So I want to talk about a century then from the founding of modern science fiction to the present day, to try to show how science fiction and the engineering and scientific vision of space and our future in space have evolved together. Now, I've got absolutely no special effects except for this tortoise and books. And that's not me being cheap. It's a deliberate strategy, actually. I mean, I'd like to try to argue that a book like this, at least some books, are just as significant in our culture as the magnificent engineering which was on display in the exhibition hall earlier. And this book you'll see is H.G. Wells', I hope you can see, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. Not a first edition, but it's a nice penguin edition with Martian fighting machines stalking across the Surrey landscape. One of the founding texts of modern science fiction, although the origins of science fiction are another debate. Wells, I'm sure you're familiar with the basic story. The Earth, specifically southern England, is invaded by Martians. Predatory, voracious, literally blood-sucking Martians who are not interested in communication at all. They come to take our planet and to take us. Now, in this book, Wells was attempting many things. It's a parable about colonialism, which hit home with the late Victorian empire builders. It's an evolutionary saga. Wells was very hot on evolution, having been taught by Huxley, one generation away from Darwin. And throughout his writing, Wells would again and again show species coming into conflict, not really in wars, but in conflicts that would end in the extermination of one side or another. Very Darwinian conflicts. And indeed, the artilleryman in the War of the Worlds says, this isn't a war any more than there's a war between men and ants. However, it is, of course, a book about space travel and life on other worlds. And where did Wells get his basic idea from the reality as it was then understood of Mars? The book was published in 1897, so only 20 years after Schiaparelli, the Italian astronomer, believed he saw a network of lines on the surface of Mars, optically. He called them canali, which meant channels, but Percival Lowell, the American astronomer, spun out those observations into a terrific hypothesis of a civilization on Mars. I mean, it was believed that the further from the sun you were, the older your world was, but also the more advanced an intelligent race would be. So Lowell imagined a technologically advanced race on a cold, arid, dying Mars, unifying politically to build a network of irrigation canals. In one of his schemes, there was 437 canals, many of them 5,000 kilometers long. And this is the Mars which inspired Wells to found his fiction. There's a short passage in here which I'll read, which could have come straight out of Lowell's science. Since Mars is older than our Earth, with scarcely a quarter of the superficial area remoter from the sun, it necessarily follows that it's only more distant. Is not only more distant from life's beginning, but nearer its end. That secular cooling that must someday overtake our planet has already gone far indeed with our neighbour. Its air is much more attenuated than ours. Its oceans have shrunk, and as its slow seasons change, huge snow caps gather and melt about either pole and periodically inundate its temperate zones. That last stage of exhaustion, which is to us still incredibly remote, has become a present-day problem for the inhabitants of Mars. The immediate pressure of necessity has brightened their intellects, enlarged their powers, and hardened their hearts. And so they come to take our younger, warmer Earth. I suspect you're all familiar with War of the Worlds, but you may not be so familiar with this book. This is Two Planets by Kurt Laswitz, a German writer. He was actually a mathematics professor from Jena in Germany. Published in the same year as Wells' book, based on the same premise of the Lowellian Mars and inhabited Mars. But as you can see, I hope, there are no fighting machines here. This is a Martian, a beautiful lady floating around ethereally. And the story here is that Martians on Earth are discovered by two German explorers. They're heading for the North Pole by balloon. If you remember, the pole hadn't been reached by in 1897. What they find there is not just ice, but a Martian base. And there's a space station suspended over the pole and up along the axis. And the Martians have come here by anti-gravity in this case. It's terrific. And unlike Wells, Laswitz's Martians are benevolent. They've reached a kind of utopian state on their own planet. They've banished need and hunger through technology. They draw power directly from the sun, and they can synthesize food from inanimate objects, rocks to bread. And they've ended conflict through the betterment of the individual through education, which is a very 19th century dream, sort of Immanuel Kant and so on. So the utopian Martians have come to the Earth to help us, really, to uplift us into their utopian state. Also, though, they're a bit colonial. They want to harvest our sunlight and so on. And the story is interesting, but things don't go all that smoothly, because from the beginning, some of us fear that even though friendship is not necessarily a good idea, the friendship of the Martians appears dangerous to me, the enmity appears disastrous. And now you've got to remember this is a book written by a German. In the story, things go wrong when a British warship opens fire on a Martian airship, an anti-gravity airship. So war ensues anyway between Mars and the Earth because of the British. It was all our fault. But in the end, we make peace, and you have humanity, united Martians. We join together in a sort of interplanetary, technological and moral utopia. So it's kind of utopian fantasy in the end. And it was banned by the Nazis for being too pacifist, which is quite a qualification, I think. Should be on the cover. Well, it wasn't. There was a kind of parochialism in science fiction, unfortunately, where there's very little translation between different languages. So this wasn't translated, in fact, into English until 1971. So it wasn't too well known in the Anglophone world. But Arthur C. Clarke knew about it, and I'm going to be mentioning Nick Clarke's name a few times this afternoon. He spoke to the BIS in 1950. Of course, he was central to the development of the BIS itself. He said, as far as I know, Laswitz's book has not been translated into English, which is a great pity, as it's one of the most important of all interplanetary romances. Not only did it include such ideas as anti-gravity, but explosive propulsion systems, repulsors, the word later used by the German Rocket Society to describe its own early rockets, and most surprising of all, space stations. All these details were worked out with great care by the author, who was a professor of mathematics at Jena. Okay, so what influence did these books have? Well, so this is the ping-pong ball going back and forwards. I started with Lowell's Mars. Across comes the ball to the science fiction writers who spin out these great fantasies. Two Planets was not well known in the English-speaking world, but it was very popular in Germany for several decades. And among those who were influenced by it was Wernher von Braun, who I'm sure you know that name. He was before the war, he was a German rocket pioneer and experimenter. During the war, he worked for the Nazis on the V2 program, and then led the American Apollo moon program. The Saturn V was very much a technological descendant of the V2, so a very significant figure. And he was influenced by Two Planets. And in fact, he gave an epigraph to this 1971 edition, which says, I shall never forget how I devoured this novel with curiosity and excitement as a young man. And I believe that reading it today, meaning the 1970s, will be of enhanced interest when electronic and human eyes have already gathered the first direct impressions of the moon and our neighboring planets. We may also realize what fascinating possibilities are opening up for the generations of the 21st century, when through the expansion of the universe, our dreams and fancies will become realities. Wernher von Braun. Meanwhile, Wells was inspiring, among others, Robert Goddard. Robert Goddard was an American rocketry pioneer. I think in his lifetime he was not as well appreciated as von Braun turned out to be, but many of his innovations, fuel pumps, self-cooling rocket motors, and so forth, ended up being crucial in the effort that took men to the moon. He was 6 when the War of the Worlds was serialized in the Boston Post. I think it was a pirated serialization, actually, but I'll let that pass. And he said in his diary later, he said, it gripped my imagination tremendously. Wells's wonderfully true psychology made the thing very vivid. He climbed a cherry tree in his backyard, and he imagined how wonderful it would be to make some device which had even the possibility of ascending to Mars. When I descended the tree, existence at last seemed very purposive. I mean, he must have been a very serious little 6-year-old boy. However, you can see what's happening here. There are visions in these books of travel between Mars and the Earth. How are you going to do it? Wells's Martians were fired out of a cannon. Well, that's not going to work. Jules Verne tried the same trick. The Martians in Laswitz's book had anti-gravity. Well, that's too far beyond us, on the other hand. Rockets, though, maybe rockets are the way to do it. So you have the dream planted. See this ping-pong ball going back again. The dream is planted, and the rocket pioneers tried to find ways to make it a reality. So after decades more development, and I suppose by the end of the war, surely the potential of the rockets as a device for interplanetary travel was well established. You have new fantasies, a new generation of science fiction writers, such as our friend Arthur again, with this book, The Sands of Mars from 1951, in which rockets and development of rockets are used to journey to a 1950s Mars, which is charming in itself. No more canals, but we still believe there was life there. Leathery cactus-like things, and you could walk around with just a face mask on, you know. It's rather like a mountain region in the Earth. I won't read much of this, but there's a nice little passage where we're on the way to Mars, and two characters are arguing about science fiction, whether science fiction is any use as it had its day. So Gibson's face creased into a smile and he began to laugh. Well, show the joke. What's so funny? Our earlier conversation. I was just wondering what H.G. Wells would have thought if he'd known that one day a couple of men would be discussing his stories halfway between Earth and Mars. Don't exaggerate, said Norden. We're only a third of the way so far. It's not just in the nuts and bolts of space travel, though, that science fiction, I believe, has had an import into this ping-pong match between imagination and reality. I mean, after all, beyond the technology that will take us to the planets lies our whole future in space, maybe not in space, our future alone in the universe, maybe not alone. If we're not alone, how will our evolution be affected by being part of a community of other intelligences? These great questions. And the ideas set out in both Wells's and Laswitz's books continue to influence us today. Now, here's my next specimen. Carl Sagan's Contact, famously made into a movie in the 90s. So Sagan was a scientist, of course, and this was one of his exercises in public communication. This is very much a descendant of the kind of fiction, the kind of ideas which informed Laswitz, that the aliens will be benevolent. They'll be on our side. If they come here at all, they'll come to help us. Sagan's logic was that they had to be benevolent, because anybody malevolent would have destroyed themselves long before they got off the planet, their own planet. And so I'm sure you know the basic story here. We receive a message from Vega, which turns out to be an instruction machine for building a wormhole, which takes us to an encounter with the aliens, where we find that they're basically good guys. According to Sagan, the very existence of the message itself will make us happy to know that there's somebody else out there. He says, for decades, young people have tried not to think too carefully about tomorrow. Now there might be a benign future after all. And as for the aliens, well, they're part of a kind of galactic club who are cooperating to manage the evolution of the cosmos as a whole. It's a terrific vision, really. They've cultivated the whole galaxy. And now they've come to help us. Sagan says, we thought you could use a little help. However, at the other end of the spectrum, the Wellsian end, if I can show you one of my own works here, if I may. It's the cover of Exultant, one of my novels, in which war is endemic in the galaxy. As I said, this is certainly one strand of Wells's thinking, that natural selection, if that's universal, may require war in a sense, even between communicating intelligences. And here I've imagined a future like that, where after 500,000 years of war, it's affected our very evolution, and we've become child soldiers, like this girl in the cover, although she's happy being a child soldier. These two possibilities, you can see that these are conflicting ideas and theories about the nature of the alien and our future in the universe. Benevolent and peaceful cooperative versus malevolent and warlike. And these ideas are still extremely influential today. Now, in the last year or so, I've become involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the radio astronomers, and I'm on an advisory committee to do with all that. My committee is to do with post-detection policies. What happens if we actually detect a signal? How should we handle it? And I became aware that I'd walked into an argument there between these two camps. There are some who believe that we should signal to the aliens, not just sit and wait. Maybe they're waiting for us to signal to show that we're ready, you know, to accept a signal from outside. Others believe that that's extremely dangerous. Maybe the galaxy is so quiet because no one wants to attract the bad guys. We'd be like baby birds cheeping in the jungle. So it's an interesting debate about, not just about the sort of the theoretical dangers, but also about consent and choice. Who speaks for mankind? but its origins go right back to at least a century in terms of these conflicting views of the future of life in the galaxy. One more example. After a century, science fiction is capable of reflection as well. After all, we've been to the moon and then we stopped. And I'll give you one more example, another of my novels here, Voyage. There's a strand of science fiction which looks backwards in a way, in a nostalgic way. In this, I hope you can see that here's Mars, and here's a spacecraft that looks like it's been cobbled together from bits of Apollo technology, bits of the Saturn launcher, and there's an Apollo command module sort of thing stuck on the side. Here, it's an alternate history in which NASA makes, well, the administration makes a different choice after Apollo, and they go on to Mars, as was NASA's plan, after all, in 1969 or 70. And they reach Mars in 1986. How would it have been? This is a very popular book with people of about my age, 40s and 50s, who grew up with the promise of Apollo, which felt as if it was never quite fulfilled. This is how it might have been. It's not a monochromatic view, though, because there would have been losses, in particular science compromises, as the lunar science program was compromised to support Apollo. But I think it illustrates that as we look forward, we don't necessarily have to go on. It may not be us, our civilization, that takes the next step, whatever the next step is. There's the famous example of the Chinese, who in the 15th century were far ahead of the West in terms of ship technology, and went exploring tentatively around India and so on. But then for cultural reasons, they gave up and destroyed the treasure ships and stayed home. It may not be us in the end who wins out. And I'll finish with one more quote from Wells. I sometimes think reading Wells, that science fiction could have stopped with Wells and much of the good stuff would still have been around. But here's the ending of the War of the Worlds. It's not a detail that's not well remembered about War of the Worlds is that the Martians are seen to launch again from Mars, but they go to Venus this time and not to the Earth. But here's the close of War of the Worlds. The broadening of men's views that have resulted can scarcely be exaggerated. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space, no life existed beyond the petty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. If the Martians can reach Venus, there's no reason to suppose that the thing is impossible for men. And when the slow cooling of the sun makes this Earth uninhabitable, as at last it must do, it may be that the thread of life that has begun here will have streamed out and caught our sister planet within its toils, should we conquer. Dim and wonderful is the vision I have conjured up in my mind of life spreading slowly from this little seedbed of the solar system throughout the inanimate vastness of sidereal space. But that is a remote dream. It may be, on the other hand, that the destruction of the Martians is only a reprieve. To them, and not to us, perhaps, is the future ordained. Thank you.
Yes, we definitely are open for questions. I guess if people would like to approach a microphone, please do come up to, or she'll bring one around to you.
That's very nice, Stephen. I'm Louis Friedman from the Planetary Society. We succeeded this past year in taking the first book to another world, and the stories of Mars are all now on Mars in the Visions of Mars DVD that we developed with NASA and on the Phoenix lander. So there's the first book is on Mars, and when the astronauts get up there and need something to do, they'll be able to read all of the stories that you just cited, or at least the ones about Mars that inspired another generation, and get the ping pong game going again.
That's terrific.
Are there other questions? Hi, I was just I was interested to know whether your thoughts on well, I seem to realise there seems to be a trend in science fiction away from the actual hard science. There seems to be more books about sort of New Age philosophies and kind of sword and sorcery and magic, and I'm just wondering whether there's a worrying trend away from the actual science in science fiction itself.
I'm not sure if there's a kind of a monotonic trend. This debate between fantasy, which is more like mythology, versus the kind of SF I write, hard SF, which is more science-based. That's another ping-pong game. And I think, especially with the Lord of the Rings movies and so forth, fantasy was in the ascendancy for a while. But commercially, science fiction is coming back. So if you're a young writer now, the thing to go into, from that point of view, if your ambition is science fiction. And certainly, I mean, the ping pong game I talked about has gone on with Mars. You know, you have the terrific books in the 90s by Kim Stanley Robinson on the terraforming of Mars, and a new generation of books in post the Mars meteorite, you know, which looked as if it carried traces of life materials from Mars, to do with bacterial Mars. You know, maybe we'll find a kind of bacterial ecosphere there, deep under the ground, and so it goes on. Now, I think this SF is a there may be a maximum reach to its appeal, but it seems to have a sort of underlying substrate below it, which it never sinks. So I'm confident about the future. Yeah.
Okay. Johan Eström from Hydro Aluminium. I have two questions. During your career as a sci-fi writer, how many space conferences like this one have you visited? And my second question, would you advise future science fiction writer to visit the ISC, or the ISC to invite them to get maybe a better view of the real science?
Actually, this is the first ISC I've been to, but in the course of my research, and I've been attending SETI conferences this year, writing Voyage, which was all about NASA's history, really. I researched it in London, but then went over to NASA. I took a manuscript over to NASA, and the Solar System Exploration Division especially were very helpful, the historians there. I dug at some history which they'd lost in terms of possibilities. And I think there's no, for the writer, there's no substitute for direct exposure to these places. I met a couple of the astronauts as well, Charles Duke, for instance, and there's no substitute for meeting these people and trying to get some sense of their experience. But I think certainly, I mean, this is the theme from imagination to reality. I certainly think that SF writers should be invited along to events like this, which is why I'm involved with SETI. SF writers have traditionally been involved, maybe only one or two of us at a time, to sessions like that. Science fiction has always been a kind of database of ideas ranging from the plausible all the way to the fantastic, with a kind of fuzzily defined margin of plausibility in between. So I think it's definitely like a database to tap in from that side, yes.
Hello, I'm Bob Shaw. I'd like to ask Stephen, as an established hard science fiction writer, an SF writer who's won all the awards there are, how do you feel about being introduced as a sci-fi author?
Well, sci-fi is a kind of it's usually taken to mean Star Trek and stuff. But what the hey, I like Star Trek as well. It's fine, I'm cool. Any more? Yes, sir.
My name is Eric Patterson. I'm from Canada, originally from Glasgow. You left out the role of science fiction in cinema. The thing that inspired me, the film that inspired me to become interested in space, was Destination Moon, which of course was the first truly scientific, factually based film of them all. And for a generation of people of my advancing age group, was incredibly inspiring. I don't think any science fiction collection is complete without a copy of that film.
Yes, I enjoyed that movie, and movies like When Worlds Collide made a difference to me. It kind of relates back to the previous question. There was definitely a place for sci-fi, for the media stuff. But I'm a prose writer. That's what really moves me.
We'll do one more question now. As you can see, there's many seats up here. Stephen is going to join us here in a moment, and then the rest of the presenters today will be here, available at the end of the whole presentation for even more questions.
Hello, my name is Jenny Edwards. I was just wondering if you believe that there's life out there, and if so, why?
Oh, well, very good question. I wrote a whole series of novels called the Manifold series about that very question, where, it's looking, the same people in the same situation, looking at different possibilities. One is that we're alone, one is that they're hiding, one is that the universe is a dangerous place so nobody can get very far, and so on. I think my personal belief is that surely we're not alone. And the universe is so vast, it seems, even no matter how improbable it is that intelligence evolves, it seems impossible that it should only have evolved once. But it's interesting that as SETI, the search for ETI, goes on and it increases its range, and we still find nothing. Maybe it's further away or more distant or more strange than we imagine, but I don't believe we're alone, no. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much. The next part of the presentations today will be on medical issues with private space travel, and we have a panel of 3 and a Master of Ceremonies that will be coming up. So we'll introduce the panelists and then introduce the MC. The first panelist is Loretta Hidalgo Whitesides. She's traveled 2 miles down to the bottom of the ocean with director James Cameron to film the 3D IMAX movie Aliens of the Deep, and trains people to float weightless on the Zero Gravity Corporation's 727 aircraft. She and her husband, George, are planning to be the first ever space honeymoon on Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2. Loretta was staff for the NASA Academy program at NASA Ames Research Center and is the director of the U.S. operations for the Space Generation Advisory Council. And she attended the International Space University Summer Session Program in Chile. Loretta is the co-founder and executive director of Yuri's Night, the annual worldwide space party held every April 12th, which she created with her husband George in 2001. This year, 198 events were celebrated in over 50 countries, and the participants had over 8,000 trees planted to let the world know that space explorers love Earth too. You can read her blogs about space exploration for Wired Science and see her lead workshops on launching your career in space for undergraduate students. She joins now. Loretta has joined us, yes. George Whitesides is the executive director of the National Space Society, the largest space advocacy group dedicated to human spaceflight. George serves as senior advisor to Virgin Galactic, which was founded by Sir Richard Branson as a new space venture established to undertake the challenge of making private space travel available to everyone. George also serves as the chairman of the Reusable Launch Vehicle Working Group within FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee. Prior to these positions, Mr. Whitesides was the founder and director of Permission to Dream, a global space education program concerned with connecting underprivileged children with space and astronomy. George was vice president of marketing for Zero Gravity Corporation, the first commercial parabolic flight company. Mr. Whitesides received an undergraduate degree from Princeton University in 1996, and he was a Fulbright Scholar, and he received a master's degree in remote sensing and geographic information systems from the University of Cambridge in England in 2000. Whitesides is a private pilot and parabolic flight coach for Zero Gravity Corporation. Welcome, George.
Our next panelist is Dr. Melchor Antuyano. He was born in Mexico City and is a graduate of the National Autonomous University of Mexico School of Medicine. He is the director of the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration Civil Aerospace Medical Institute and is responsible for the administration of national programs in aerospace medical certification, medical education, medical research, human factors research, and occupational health services. He is credited with over 476 presentations and lectures at national and international conferences in aerospace medicine in 27 countries. He has received 64 awards and recognitions for his academic, administrative, and research achievements. He is a fellow and past president of the U.S. Aerospace Medical Association and past president of the Space Medicine Association. Dr. Melchor is a member of several organizations, including the International Academy of Aviation and Space Medicine, the International Academy of Astronautics, as well as a member of national space medicine societies in Greece, Brazil, Mexico, Slovenia, Turkey, and Colombia. Please welcome Dr. Melchor. And our moderator for this segment is Dr. John Rummel. John was the senior scientist for astrobiology at NASA headquarters. He was the planetary protection officer and has worked on every NASA robotic planetary mission currently in operation. He is now the director of the Institute for Coastal Science and Policy at East Carolina University in the United States, and he is the chair of the Life Sciences Symposium for the IAF and the past chair of Commission 2 of the International Astronautical Academy. John.
Well, it's great to have the audience so enthusiastic about this subject. I wonder after Stephen Baxter's presentation that we are actually all desiring to be extraterrestrials. It seems to me we might be a very dangerous group if we get out there. But today we'd like to talk a little bit about the emerging field of commercial spaceflight, the medical issues associated with having everybody, every man go up, as it were, and some of the reasons, the personal aspects why somebody might want to go on a commercial space flight and what it might mean to them to do that. George will not talk about medicine, but we'll talk about the opportunities, not only with Virgin Galactic, but anything else you'd like to say about the competitors. That's probably low. But and then Melchior Antonio will talk about the recent International Academy of Astronautics study on medical requirements for commercial orbital space flight, somewhat in contraposition to the non-orbital space flights that are being begun at the lower rates than the buying yourself a seat on Soyuz or something along that line. And then Loretta will talk about her personal desires to go to space, and you can make a judgment for yourself as George gives his presentation why she might want to be on a honeymoon in space with him.
Thanks very much. Well, it's great. It's a wonderful opportunity to be on stage with my wife, which I don't get very often. So it's wonderful to be here with you. Why don't I start off with a question that I often ask is to audiences, which I think might be slightly skewed in this group, which is first of all, how many of you have been to space? If you could raise your hand, if you've been to space. Maybe if you could stand up and just so that we know where you are. If you've been to space, that's at least one. We got another one there. Anybody else in the audience? I think might have one more. Okay, great. Well, maybe one in the back. I think I saw. Yes, great. Okay, big round of applause for our space travelers here. Okay, and my next question is: how many of you believe that you will be able to go to space during your lifetime? You can either raise your hand or stand up. I get a. That's pretty good. That's pretty good here. And how many of you would like to go, whether or not you believe that you'd like, whether you are able to go? And that's pretty darn good. Again, slightly biased group skewing in this audience. But I want to talk to you about personal spaceflight and the opportunities that I think that we'll all have during our lifetimes. And in particular, my thesis to you would be that within 15 to 20 years, most of the people that raise their hands as wanting to go to space will have the opportunity to go to space. And I think that will sort of fundamentally transform our relationship with space and transform humanity's relationship with space. And to do that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what's been going on for the last 15 or so years, and then I'm going to look forward for the next 15 or 20 years in terms of what's coming down the pike, in terms of the very real opportunities and very exciting opportunities that are being constructed now in the private sector primarily. So, but to start off, I thought we'd just see some beautiful pictures on this massive screen that we've got here. This is what it's all about, right? Space, the beauty of space, the wonder of our solar system and our galaxy, and of course, the wonder of planet Earth, that sort of jewel that we happen to be so lucky to live on, and thanks to JAXA, of course, for that image, and coming down to orbit and to the surface of our planet. We are so lucky to be born at a moment where we may actually be able to leave the surface of our planet and travel into space. And I think it's just, I think it's, it's a wonderful sort of fortuitous occurrence that we're born between the time that humans couldn't go to space and the time that many people can go to space. And that's what's really exciting. And personal spaceflight will take us there. So let's sort of go on a little story for the last 10 years or so, and then we'll go forward. There's been a tremendous amount of activity over the last 15 years or so in the area of commercial entrepreneurial spaceflight. And my comments today will focus primarily on private ventures that are focused on sending humans, not professional astronauts, but sort of the public and members of of the interested public to go into space. And I'm going to be focusing on companies that have flown hardware, but I'll also speak of some of the other great entities that are out there. The story, I think, in many ways begins in 1996, when a guy named Peter Diamandis, one of the wonderful members of our global space community, founded something called the X Prize, which was a competition to send a reusable spacecraft twice into space in a short period of time, about 2 weeks. The craft had to hold 3 people, and the intent was to jumpstart a race to space, a new age of space in which reusable spacecraft could take people up into the edge of space, give them the space experience, and that in turn would generate technical innovations which could drive later space flight. A critical other development at around this time was that the International Space Station became sort of open for visits. And we had Dennis Tito, an American financier, buy the first ticket with his own money to go into space. And since then, we've had 4 other people, all entrepreneurs in various ways, go into space. And we have our next one very shortly. Over the next week, Richard Garrett will go into space and become, I think, the first touristic son of an astronaut. I believe that there's a Russian father-son combination that went up earlier this year. But these people, though it was a very expensive price point, showed that private space travel was not just possible, but that there was a market there. And this is really the critical point for the future of humanity and for the future of spaceflight. We need a market driver beyond the markets and the processes, the budget processes that drive space today. Something outside of the government, something outside of commercial satellite technology, something that would take you and me into space and prove that there was a real market for that. Now, Anousheh Ansari, who many of you know, one of these ISS travelers, did a fundamentally important thing. I think arguably much more important than her own personal trip, was to fund the X Prize. And she put the money up, the $10 million up, for that competition. And then another person, Paul Allen, one of the co-founders of Microsoft, invested in Burt Rutan, a designer, an aerospace designer in California, to build a vehicle that would compete in this competition. And so they built this, Spaceship One and White Knight One, which was an entrance to the X Prize, and which won it in 2004. And here you see Burt and some friends here right after the competition. Loretta and I were there, and it was a wonderful moment. Then this other guy gets into the picture, Richard Branson, and he had been looking for something to invest in space for a few years. Virgin Galactic was actually founded in 1999, as Will Whitehorn mentioned a few days ago. And the important thing there was that there was then a organization that was very familiar with global branding and global marketing that could sort of set up the marketing processes to have people buy tickets. And in fact, an enormous amount of people have already signed up. Nearly 300 people have now signed up for the Virgin Galactic service. They're going to fly on this. This is what Loretta and I hope to fly on in a few years. And the first stage of that, if you will, the White Knight 2 carrier vehicle, was unveiled a few months ago out in California. And so that's sort of an initial tale. But what I want to quickly go through is a few more stories of some other companies that are doing great things as well. And one of them, here are some shots of folks floating around and what it will be like in suborbital space. One of them is Elon Musk, who's founded a company called SpaceX. Many of you know that earlier this week, Elon had a success, and SpaceX had a success putting their first rocket into orbit. And that's important not just for the fact that he's building an affordable, low-cost orbital access option, but because his aspiration is to build a human capsule that would go to the International Space Station and potentially other destinations. He's trying to build something that could take you and I into orbit, and that's very, very exciting. There's another company called Orbital Sciences which is doing a similar thing, although they haven't asked to or haven't competed yet to send humans into space. Now there's this guy, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, who's also building something This is the Goddard vehicle, which he's building down in West Texas. He's bought himself a huge ranch, a test ranch. He's using the proceeds from Amazon to fund this project. And it's also tremendously exciting. It's a different design. It's based sort of around the ideas of the DCX, which many of you are familiar with and which had some very successful tests in the 1990s. This will be, at least to start, a suborbital vehicle, although many people think that Jeff would also like to go into orbit eventually. A third very exciting strand here is Bigelow Aerospace. Robert Bigelow is the man on the left here, and he runs something called the Budget Suites of America. And if you go to Las Vegas, there's a good chance that you might stay at one of his hotels. And he's very excited in a different idea, which is to build a private space station in orbit. And he's got various designs. And like many of these other wonderful people, he's got the money to do it, and he's actually had success flying real space hardware. These are two of his vehicles that are now in orbit, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. They're inflatable vehicles. He's using technology that was developed by NASA as part of the Transhab program. And he's doing sort of innovative things like broadcasting the images of people on the side of his ship. And you'll see the word Blair there. That's his granddaughter's name. And so he's looking into ways to really get the public involved in the future of space. There's also great companies like Excalibur Almaz, who's utilizing some Russian technology, and X-Core, which is doing really exciting engine work on reusable, restartable engines. This is their Thunderhawk vehicle, and they have another vehicle. There's a company called Armadillo Aerospace, and I really have to show you some of these images. I'm sure many of you know that they're competing in the Lunar Lander Challenge, but what I love is that they've got these just amazing concepts to send people into space, and you're going to love this here. This is getting ready for launch, and then you launch, and then there you are floating. Now, I don't have the fourth chart here, which is how you get back down, but I'm sure that will be very exciting as well. And there's also, I see some friends out here. There's also great companies, Rocket Plane Kistler and others that are doing fantastic things. But here are the people. Here are the people who are involved. Virgin's got nearly 300 folks signed up with, I think, around 40 million in deposits. And that's very exciting. That's real people. They're not people who are necessarily worth billions of dollars, but they're making it go because their dream is to go into space. And without them, it really wouldn't be possible. Now, we're starting to go through the reality of this program, which is really great. We're doing centrifuge testing. This is Loretta looking actually fairly good, I think, at 6 Gs here. And far better than I was. And recently there was about 80 people went through a 6G test flight program, and here's one of my favorite pictures of all time, which is, of course, Stephen Hawking floating in weightlessness recently on board the zero-gravity parabolic flight vehicle. Now, that's not necessarily going to space, but it's certainly a precursor space activity, and it's something that has a much lower price point. When I was at Cambridge, I would see Dr. Hawking fairly often, and I don't think I ever saw him smile this much as he did when he was floating there. And it's just such a wonderful moment to see the freedom and the joy and the interest in that. So just a final couple words. Don't have much time here, but of the future. And I really think that what's really going to blow this all open is point-to-point space travel. You're going from Glasgow to Los Angeles in 2 hours, or wherever. I think that's going to be a tremendously exciting thing. It's going to be bigger than tourism. Who wouldn't want to go on long-distance journeys faster? And I think as long as it's safe, it will. There are spaceports springing up all over the United States. Here's one of them. This is the Virgin Galactic spaceport that's being built by the New Mexico Spaceport Authority. Will be the anchor tenant of that down in New Mexico. I think it's sort of a science fiction shape. And then the future entails all kinds of human activity. I think every kind of human activity gets better when the word space is attached to it. You have space sports, and Loretta and I have talked about being space garbage collectors, and we'll eventually have lunar tourism. Space Adventures has announced this concept of using a couple of Soyuz to make the journey. Apparently it's well suited to that. I think that'll come, $100 million. I don't have it, but someone does, and it would certainly make history. And down the road, of course, we'll be cavorting on asteroids and perhaps saving the planet. So that's just sort of an overview. It's a tremendously exciting time. I'm not sure that the world really realizes the tremendous amount of activity that's going on in entrepreneurial spaceflight. But it's coming, and it's going to change. It's going to change everything. Thanks so much.
Well, the expectation is that this will open up a frontier. We can take one question while Mel gets up to the podium. If somebody's got a burning question right now, please go ahead and step up or raise your hand, and a mic will happen. But we'll also try to have time for questions at the end of the session for everyone as well. Is there any particular question right now? I think it looks good. If we get our bodies into orbit, however, we need to know what's going to happen to them and what the current considerations are from the International Academy of Astronautics. Mel, take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this panel. Even though I'm an aerospace medicine specialist, considering that most of the attendees are not physicians, I'm not going to bore you with lists of medical conditions that are of concern, but I want to share with you some of the considerations as to why we put together this study group, what were some of the issues, safety-related, medical-related, and why finally we have a report that was approved this week, so it's going to be finally released to the public, and it's going to be made available through the IAA website. Where is the... Oh, here. So I like this quote from Einstein. He said, "I never think of the future because it comes soon enough." And in a way, that's the way we are, or that's where we are in commercial space operations, because some of us were surprised how fast things were developing, and in some regards, that we were a little bit behind the power curve on the medical side. So why are we doing this study? And there are a couple of things. You already saw some of the suborbital and some of the orbital space operations. We know so far we have had 5 people going as part of space adventures on the flights to the International Space Station. But from a medical perspective, there is one individual, Greg Olsen, that he actually allowed the public to have access to his medical records after he completed the flight. He was an individual, he's an individual who had many medical problems, that before he was allowed to fly, he had to have surgery, he had to have rehabilitation, he had to do many other things in order to let him go. So it was not an issue of telling him, sorry, you are not going. Well, this is what we have to do, and then you are going. So from that perspective, it was a challenge, but people like him that were willing to disclose the findings from a medical perspective, that makes a huge difference for the rest of us, because now we know what kind of flexibility we can use for letting people go to space. And this is another quote that I really like. It says, "The problem is never how to get new, innovative thoughts into your mind, but how to get the old ones out." And what that means is that we have to push the envelope. We have to keep doing innovative things. And one of those, of course, is the proposal that now we should have space tourists that should do a spacewalk for an additional multi-million-dollar fee that may be $10, $15 million more. But if people can afford it, why not? And if they can do it safely, why not? I would do it. If I had the money, I would do it. Obviously, the other option that was proposed, the circumlunar flights for about $100 million, there are some people who can afford it. Go for it. Why not? I'm not going to spend too much time on these because some of those were already shown. But I want to show you this one because in the proposed design for the Dragon by SpaceX, it would accommodate up to 7 passengers. And this one is not considered suborbital. This would be considered an orbital vehicle. And fortunately, they have had finally their very successful flight last week that opens other doors to actually continue also the development of this capsule. And finally to go on lunar flights with different types of proposed vehicles. So what's really the bottom line here? That we have other options. The same thing with the commercial space stations. As it was mentioned that we have 2 modules right now in orbit. The one thing that I'm going to add to that from a medical perspective, that there is a biological payload. Genesis 1 has roaches and Mexican jumping beans, and I'm glad because those are from Mexico. Genesis 2 has roaches, ants, and scorpions. And that was to test not only carrying a biological organism, but some rudimentary life support systems requirement. If everything goes according to plan, it is very likely that he will skip launching a larger module this year and just go for the Sundance module in 2010 and prepare it for human occupancy by 2012. So there are certain components or certain proposals that, yes, there are things that are for sale in space. Now, let me go back and now cover a little bit of the safety-related issues. Right now, around the world, only the US has established licensing requirements for manned commercial space operations. Nobody else has done it to the extent that we have done it. However, one of the very strict requirements is that the passengers have to be fully informed about all of the potential risks of participating in space flights, which begs the question, what potential risks should be disclosed? Because on the one hand, you want to decrease to some extent the liability, and that's why you want to disclose all the potential risks. But on the other hand, you don't want to scare people that they will say, I changed my mind, I don't want to go anymore. So what's the right approach? To be determined. So let me cover with you why risk disclosure is important. And here we have the situation where an individual who goes can be a teddy bear or can be a grizzly bear. And let's face it, in societies including the United States, people like to sue. And if people like to sue, if everything goes according to plan, everything is perfect, no problem. And usually if there is a bad outcome, usually the person who is going to sue is not the person who signed the release of responsibility because that person is not coming back. So it may be somebody else, maybe the spouse, maybe a close relative. So all of those are issues that we have to address. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that the public, all of us, we have the right to take some personal risks. We do. And I love this quote from Michelangelo. He said, the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it is too low and we reach it. So we have to keep pushing the envelope. But at the same time, we have to always be prepared to deal with the risks in disguise. And that's why the full disclosure is very important. I love kayaks. And some of you may be kayakers, but what is the main risk if you're in a kayak and you don't know how to do it? That you get in the kayak, you flip upside down, you don't get out of it, and you drown. But you see this image, and you see, well, there are no waves, obviously no wind, perfect day. So the relative risk here, you would say, that's a low risk. Well, it depends on the information that I give you, because if now I show you this, did that change your risk perception? Yes. And from that perspective, you have to get more information, more disclosure of the potential risks to make a good decision. So the question is it risky to fly in space? Yes, it is. It is risky to fly an airplane, but the risks vary. And there are differences. In this case, suborbital versus orbital flights, short flights versus long flights. But do we know all of the medical risks of flying in space? Do we know them all? The answer is no. We have very limited experience, mostly with young professional astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts, but we don't have experience with people who have medical problems, that we give them waivers and we allow them to fly in space. What medical data is available to the public? There is limited, but based on professional astronauts, we have this report that includes 106 space shuttle missions, that many astronauts, that many flights. And you can see that 98% of men and 94% of women reported that many in-flight medical events, most of them minor. But the issue is that even very healthy people will experience certain symptoms and signs in space. There is another report that we don't have the time to talk about, which that covers cosmonauts in the Mir program from those years, and then also in the NASA Mir program from that time period. Anybody interested, I can give you the references. But what about the experience that we have had in commercial spaceflight participants? And as I mentioned, Gregory Olsen, not bothering you with details, but he had all kinds of medical problems. He underwent preventive treatment, including preventive surgery, in order to make it possible for him to fly. At the same time, he had to be tested altitude chamber, altitude gas mixture simulation, a zero-G flight, and the centrifuge to make sure that whatever was done medically was correct so he could be allowed to fly. He flew, came back, no problem, he did it. But that brings the question, then what's the right stuff for passengers in commercial space flights? Is it just to fit certain physical criteria and that's it? No, we have to go beyond that. How far? Flexibility is the matter here. So that's why we put together this working group. Here are all the people participating from many countries around the world. And the objective became to identify and prioritize the medical screening considerations to do two things: preserve the health and promote the safety of the paying passengers in orbital flights up to 4 weeks in duration. The final product is a report that, as I indicated, has been approved this week in this meeting, so it will be released to the public. But there is one requirement, that the way we develop the guidelines, there is a requirement that passengers will be able and capable of performing an emergency evacuation without assistance and not compromising other people in the flight. Now, this is not a theory. We know that in the experimental flights of the Spaceship One, there was one hard landing. So we have already tested that there is a potential here for an evacuation. And I will show you a couple of things. This is a hard landing in an airplane. Look at the tail. Okay? So we're not talking about theoretical things. We are talking about things that can happen. This is an impact 16 times the force of gravity with 9G seats that are commonly used in aircraft. So hopefully we will go with higher G tolerance seats for commercial space vehicles. Then we have the issue of evacuation. And there are some challenges here as well. That people, unless they practice, they don't know how to get out of an airplane. Well, we'll have to make sure that people going in a space vehicle, they practice to get out of a space vehicle. And if it is a real emergency, trust me, people are not going to be nice. People will try to get out at the same time. So practice, training is very important, okay? And this was an experiment, and see how serious people were. How did we get to this point? We told people, if you are among the top 10% getting out first, we double your pay. And that was the incentive to do this, okay? And this, now we did it in a worst case scenario with smoke, because that's why you want to get out of a vehicle right away, because once you crash, if you survive the crash, the next thing that is likely to get you is the smoke. If the smoke doesn't get you, then the fire. And this is a 90-second time interval between the beginning of a fire and the end of a fire. So once you crash, you survive, get out immediately. We have had precedent in the space program, so this is not theoretical. And now let's say that you survived the initial impact, you survived, you didn't inhale smoke, you survived the fire. Now you get out to the environment, now you have to watch out, because it can be a nasty environment, and now you have to deal with survival scenarios, which we have had several. I will only share this one with you. Volska 2 Sunrise in 1965, they have different failures. But finally, they had a problem with separation of the service module. The vehicle was tumbling, crash landed 1,200 miles off target, and they spent the night surrounded by wolves. So obviously, that's another concern that we didn't think about. Any pre-existing medical condition could be made worse by being exposed to the stresses of space flight. So that's what we are going to be looking for, what can happen to people. And we do it in connection with these particular factors: acceleration, pressure, microgravity, solar radiation. All of these factors were what determine the list of medical conditions that we are saying we have to watch for, okay? So I'm not going to go into the specific medical conditions, but just to share with you some of the issues about acceleration. I'm here just to make a point. Saturn V, what was the maximum G load with the Saturn V? Close to 8 Gs. What's the maximum G load on the space shuttle? Anybody? Maximum 3. You can go on a roller coaster in Cedar Point in Ohio at 3.5. So you can be in a roller coaster ride faster than the space shuttle. But now we go to vehicles like the Spaceship One. You heard in the previous presentation, there could be up to 5.8 Gs. So obviously there are some issues related to acceleration exposure. Issues about barometric pressure. We have had, unfortunately, also incidents in the past. In fact, in this particular case, it was a fatal accident, that there was a failure of a valve that depressurized the spacecraft, and all of the occupants died 30 minutes before landing because of depressurization. We had, of course, this in-flight collision between a Progress M34 that crashed against the Spectre module that depressurized, but fortunately they were able to close one of the hatches so that way you did not decompress the entire station. But let's think about this. For orbital flights, you have to worry about space debris. And space debris, it doesn't matter how big or how small, it matters also the speed. The Space Shuttle program has replaced 80 windows as a result of space debris. This is the damage caused by a speck of paint traveling at a very high speed and causing essentially a quarter-inch crater on the surface of the window. All of these arrows on the Space Telescope, one of the panels, point to microcraters caused by orbiting debris. And this is a study that was released in February 2007 by NASA, where it says that there is an 18% chance that debris will impact would force abandoning the International Space Station when it is complete. A 9% chance of penetration that would lead to loss of station or its crew. So obviously we have to think about that. Now also on EVA activities, if we start doing private EVAs, well, we have to think about those things. Microgravity, I will not bother you with the details, but the four most critical systems that we have to worry about: cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, neurovestibular, and your blood, essentially, and your immune defenses, your immunological system. Osteoporosis, we have here an issue, a normal bone on Earth, a bone with osteoporosis on Earth. But we are seeing the same changes in space. But look at this. It is reported that 3.2% of bone loss occurs after 10 days of exposure to microgravity. So obviously somebody who has already lost bone is likely to lose more. Then we have issues about exposure to ionizing radiation, both solar and galactic cosmic radiation. We have issues about high intensity noise, non-ionizing radiation, vibration. This is a launch video of a launch of a space shuttle. Look how the vibration impacts the entire body. So there are certain medical conditions that obviously would not be okay if you are going to expose those individuals to vibration, okay? Temperature, we have other issues with temperature, extremes, very high temperature, very low temperature. Then we have issues with cabin air quality. One of the factors in the Apollo 13 was that CO2 was building up, so it became a cabin air issue that they had to put together some equipment in flight to get rid of the carbon dioxide. Odors, we haven't talked about that. There may be biological chemical substances, but just the smell. When we have the astronauts on the next part of the panel, ask them about how good it smells when they have been in the space station, in previous space stations, and they will tell you some things. Issues about behavioral issues, we have to think about that, crew composition, but even in 4-week space flights, there can be interesting relationships or interesting behaviors among certain people. So we have also to keep in mind that for these commercial orbital space flights, there will be limited medical intervention capabilities. Then obviously this report will have to complete a physical exam. They will have certain medical tests. Certain medical conditions may not be qualified at all, even if we try our best to prepare them. Then the disposition of those, well, under what conditions we can give waivers, under what conditions we cannot. Now, a big difference is that this approach is extremely flexible. There are some issues about pre-flight exposure in the middle of the flight, and then post-flight issues. And we included in the report a section at the end from the space law section that has to do with medical liability issues in applying some of the existing international treaties. So we're mixing now medical law with space law, and that's included in this report. So with that, I wanted to finish my presentation with this. I always want to go to space, and even if I can do it, cannot do it while I'm alive because it is very expensive right now. There is this company that if you want your ashes just to go in a parabolic flight, it's called close to $700 for 1 gram. Earth orbit, $2,500. Around the moon, they have proposed for $9,000, 1 gram. Or beyond the solar system, $12,000. So one way or another, I'm going to go to space. Thank you very much.
We can always be happy to look forward to those times when the greatest danger for commercial spaceflight are our fellow passengers. But we have some medical concerns now. We're going to skip the opportunity for free medical advice until the end of Loretta's presentation. And Loretta, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So after hearing all the reasons why you might not want to go into space, I get to tell you a little bit about why I do want to. Sorry, usually I give really more technical talks, so it's sort of interesting to have to talk from the heart. I wanted to go into space ever since I was a little girl. And when I was a child, adults would come up and ask me, "Oh, well, do you want to be an astronaut when you grow up?" And I was always sort of perplexed, because I would say, "No, when I grow up, you won't need to be an astronaut to go into space. We're all just going to have rockets in our garages." Now, I don't have a rocket in my garage, but I do have a space ticket in my hand. Thanks, honey. And so people ask me why I would do that, why I would want to go into space. Why has space been so important to me my whole life? Why has it rocked me to my core? I think George said it really well. It's the transformative effect that space can have on people. That's what moves me. That's what I care about. In college, I read a book called The Overview Effect by Frank White. And in it, he interviews astronauts and cosmonauts about their experience of being on orbit. And overwhelmingly, they talk about looking back at the Earth and seeing that fragile blue planet and that thin layer of atmosphere protecting it. And they talk about how they just fall in love with our home planet for more than they ever knew they could. And they talk about looking down on the Earth and not seeing the boundaries of the countries. Just seeing one planet, one people. That's who we are. And they actually get a taste of that. They actually get a glimpse of that while they're there. And for some of them, the experience is so profound and so powerful that they have a hard time when they get back to Earth. The petty things that used to bother them before they launched just seem insignificant now. My husband George likes to say that any problem you have on Earth looks pretty small from 330,000 feet. Sometimes I think of it a little bit like the first time you go abroad, and you're out experiencing the world, and you come back to your hometown, and you come back to the house you grew up in, and suddenly it looks more beautiful than you ever remember. Some of the astronauts that I've talked to have trouble describing in words like what the experience was like, and many of them have turned to music and to painting to express or to recapture the experience, that feeling that they had while they were there. I interned in the astronaut office when I finished college, and I had the privilege of working with Dr. Chuck Brady right after he got back from his first space flight. And he was talking about how he'd struggled to figure out which 10 CDs he wanted to bring with him to orbit, because he could only fit so much. And he said, "I don't know why I struggled so hard. In the end, the entire mission, there was only one CD that could even capture the intensity and the power and the beauty of what I was seeing. The only CD I listened to the whole time was Handel's Messiah." I also had the privilege of meeting another shuttle astronaut recently, and she was telling me a story about her love of music, and then another story about how she was in the astronaut office one day, and she saw another astronaut who slumped over his desk, sort of sad, just come back from his first mission. And she went over to him, and she nodded understandingly. And she said, "It's okay, it's normal to feel sad that you've had to coming home from your first mission. You just had this really powerful experience. It's like we all go through it." And he looked up at her appreciatively to know that he wasn't the only one who was feeling that way, dealing with all that. One of the things I'm most excited about in this new era of commercial human space exploration is that there'll be more people, more artists, more poets, more writers, going out into space to share their experiences with the public, like Anusha Ansari did with her blog that captivated the world. There'll be more people to be able to share firsthand. More people in the world will be able to hear firsthand from people their experience, just like you will get to today. Soon my husband George and I will be among that group of people who will be able to share their experience of space firsthand. And it's a fulfillment of a lifelong dream for both of us. George also wanted to go into space since he was young. And we're all the more excited to get to go to space together. Part of the motivation for us doing our honeymoon together in space with Virgin Galactic is to inspire other people that they can reach for their dreams too. So no matter who you are or what your field of interest is or what brought you here, what's the dream that inspires you? What's the idea that lights you up, that moves your heart? Set your sights on it and tell the people around you all about it, and then make it happen. And then you too can go about giving other people the courage to follow their dreams too. So we also hope that our space honeymoon will open up a discussion on peace, love, and family in space. This is one part of the human expansion into space that's not often talked about. But I think as more and more people go into space, it'll start getting more attention. And we're really excited to be a part of opening up that discussion. Another huge motivation for us is to be early adopters, people who are investing in the infancy of a new industry, helping to make it thrive and become available to more people so that eventually we'll have suborbitals, we'll have spaceports on every continent, and anybody who wants to will be able to go into space. I think the impact of suborbital space travel will make things possible that we in this room can't even imagine right now. The same way that many of the things we take for granted today in our world were unimaginable at the time of the Wright brothers. And I find that the most exciting. Sometimes I joke with my friends that we'll know we got our job done when our grandkids fall asleep on launch because it's so boring. When are we going to get there? 2 hours? Oh my gosh. A lot of people here at this conference have a passion for space exploration, just like we do. Sometimes it goes beyond the rational or the practical. Sometimes I think more of this more as a calling than a career. For me, it's a calling to be greater than ourselves, for us to give our lives to making something possible for the human race. Space has already had the privilege to be able to contribute something extraordinary to humankind. We were able to contribute one of the most inspiring events of the 20th century, the Apollo 11 moon landing. People still say, if we can land on the man on the moon, we can do anything. My commitment is that our industry be that for the world again, that we be that inspiring, that we be out doing the impossible, that we be out producing that result in the world. We didn't come here for anything less. Anyone in this room, or certainly the experts from the conference, could tell you about the vast resources of outer space that are there for throughout the solar system and beyond. But to me, the most extraordinary resource of outer space is both limited and non-renewable, and it's space itself. It's the opportunity that space represents. For me, what I'm most passionate about space is that space is a blank slate. And on that slate, we get to create whatever we want. We get to create a whole new society, a whole new civilization for humankind. We get to build on and learn everything that we've learned collectively as a human society for the last couple centuries. Or, well, okay, as long as we've been around, I guess. And we get to have the possibility of creating a civilization that works for everybody. To me, I'm excited about that opportunity that in our lifetime, we will be able to set those precedents for how we're going to live and work in space. And to me, that's the most precious and the most important resource that is out in outer space, and I want to make sure we protect it and use it responsibly. 1 minute. Thanks, John. So I first met my husband at Unispace 3 conference in Austria in 1999 at the Space Generation Forum, and I want to thank anyone in the audience who had a hand in helping plan that conference, because I got to meet him there. And I was really impressed with his poise and his leadership and his vision. He shares the same vision of space that I do, using space to bring the world together. That's the reason we founded Yuri's Night, And it's the reason we're doing our honeymoon together in space. Because we want to show the world that space isn't just about solid rocket motors or orbital mechanics, but it's about people. It's about sharing our lives and our passion and our vision and our love. We actually call our mission Space Love. Just imagine if we had more love in our space missions, in our space industry, or even in our planet. I can't think of a better way to spend my honeymoon. So thanks for being here. Thanks for caring about space. Thanks for everything you do to make it possible. And thanks for letting me share my heart with you.
I've been informed that we have time for 2 questions for this panel before we assemble the full panel. Are there any questions in the audience? I had a quick question for George. If you can take it. It seems that in the development of both the commercial shipping industry and also the development of the airline industry, that passengers have basically been supercargo historically over something that paid better money. A lot of the examples you showed were focusing on passengers alone and not much cargo. How do you think the balance will turn out in the long run?
I think that's a really great point, and it may well be that fast package delivery becomes a significant part of space travel, particularly as costs go down. We don't know for sure, but the interesting thing is that perhaps paradoxically, humans or self-loading carbon payloads, as we like to call them, can pony up before the service is actually available. And that provides sort of a catalytic impact for the market. I think that if you look back at the mail services in the early age of aviation, obviously that was sort of the critical thing. And we may well see that services to the International Space Station, providing water or other sorts of basic utilities, are the closest analogy maybe to that mail service.
Okay, thank you. I do worry a little bit because my ancestors were asked to leave this country and they had to find ships, but I'm not sure that we're in that position right yet for space. Any other questions? Okay. Yep.
Our next segment today is Life as an Astronaut. We're lucky enough to have, I believe I've seen 6 astronauts in the room. 4 of them will be joining us up here. From Russia, we have Sergei Krikalev. He's spent more time in space than anybody else at over 803 days and 9 hours. Our second astronaut is Chiaki Mukai. She was the first woman astronaut from Japan. She was also the first Japanese citizen to fly twice. Third is Jean-Francois Clairvoy. He flew 3 shuttle missions, including 1 servicing of the Hubble Space Telescope. And our fourth astronaut is Yi So-yeon, the first astronaut from the country of South Korea. Astronauts, please come join us. As they take their seats, we're going to ask each of you to maybe take about 1 minute to 2 minutes to introduce yourself to us so we all know a little bit more about you, and then we're going to open up to questions for everybody who's up here on the stage right now. So, Sergei, if you'd like to start since you're on the end.
And to talk about missions, I'm afraid it takes too much time. So, just briefly, I can say that my first flight was almost 20 years ago. We started to fly on Mir Station. It was Expedition 4 on Mir Station, year 1988. It was a very interesting flight because for me it was first flight, and then it was international mission. When beginning of our flight, when we switched with Expedition 3, we had joined Soviet-French expedition with Jean-Luc Chrétien. And then we stayed for several months more doing our job on long-duration mission. My second flight was planned as Expedition 9 mission on Mir Station. and it happened to be Expedition 9 and 10 in one flight. So it was long duration flight, little more than 10 months. My third flight was also very interesting for me because I already knew Russian hardware, Russian space program very well and spent more than 15 months in space. My third flight was a shuttle mission when I was assigned to be first Russian to fly on shuttle. And my partner, Volodya Titov, and I, we spent more than a year on the training for shuttle mission. And it was a very nice experience also. Fourth flight was first assembly mission when decisions were made to build the station, and I was on the crew that put first two pieces of International Space Station together. And Bob Caban and I opened the hatch for the first time and together flew into the station. It was a very interesting flight and very good memory. And actually this year we are going to celebrate 10 years of this flight. Fifth flight was very interesting again because it was Expedition 1, first long duration mission on ISS. And most recent flight was Expedition 11 on ISS. I was still in flight about 3 years ago.
And the next one?
See, we a little bit superstition in our business, so I would prefer to tell about next mission when I return back.
Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting us. It was a pleasure to talk about our experience. I was very lucky to fly 3 very different missions, 3 different altitudes and 3 different orbits. That's a big deal because when you have an orbit that is quite inclined above the equator plane, as you rotate on the orbit, combined with the rotation of the Earth, you see more Earth than when you are on an orbit close to the equator. On my first mission was a mission dedicated to atmospheric research. So we were flying upside down almost the whole time, and we had the overhead windows facing the Earth. So with Scott Parazinski in my shift, we were often kneeling down and sitting on the overhead window facing the Earth, and we took more than 11,000 pictures in 11 days. So we have that was the best mission for the view of the Earth, and I think that's the strongest memory for astronauts is probably the view of our planet as we go around 16 times per day around the Earth, and we fly over 45 minutes in daylight, 45 minutes in nighttime, 45 minutes on a given season, and the other 45 minutes, if it's winter on the North Hemisphere, you fly above summer in the South Hemisphere. And I have the best memory of the view of our home planet from that first mission. My second space flight was slightly lower inclination, 51 degrees to Mir, so we could go a bit higher. And it's a question of equal energy, so 400 kilometer altitude. And that was a very memorable mission on the human aspect. I mean, going to a station where you know the people are counting on you to bring food, to bring equipment so that they can keep living and working on board is great. And we had a superb 5 days docked together, 10 of us. I even went to the cinema on board because when I came in Mir, I saw a lot of videotapes on the side, and I told Vasily, the commander of Mir, we can watch a movie here? He said, yes, when you want, you tell me. And the day before undock, we were done with the mission, I mean the exchange of 4 tons of equipment. And he told me, you can choose a movie and we watch a movie tonight. And so he came to a module, came back with a TV, and he told me, you know, the speakers are broken, so we have to connect to the intercom of the station, which is not good quality for music or for a movie. And then he went to another module and brought back an old videotape recorder that probably Sergei used a lot. And then we watched a movie. It was quite fun. And my third mission was a mission for science. We had no other objectives than repairing, fixing the Hubble Space Telescope. It was broken. It was in survival mode. I was told before the mission, We cannot tell you which attitude you will find the telescope in, because it will be just in survival facing the sun, and it may be upside down. You will need to fly the robotic arm, do some tracking and capture, and we fixed it. So that's a great satisfaction for astronauts when they come back and the mission is successful. So 3 different missions, and each time very strong memories, very strong sense of duty. You know, the fear number 1 of astronauts is not to die, it's to miss the objective and to make a failure, or to miss something and not come back with 100% success, because we know there are thousands of people behind us waiting for, looking at us and waiting for a return with all objectives met. So now, as far as life on board, the work on board, we can talk later about this. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so afraid to say something, because if you can give me a time proportional to the flight time, and then I think about Sergey talk less than 10 minutes, so maybe I can have 10 seconds or something. Yeah, last April, I have been in ISS for 10 days, and then I was some kind of representative of Korea, because until that time, we don't have any astronaut. So I'm so honored to be there as a representative of Korea, and then I carried out 18 experiments. So I'm sure that I was maybe as busy as like Sergey, even though I was there just 10 days. So many experiments I did, but I was so happy to do that for so many people. And then at the time, I realized that we are live on the one of a beautiful planet in the universe, and space something is really, really international, because officially I was a Russian crew, but every meal I ate NASA foods. And then for the downlink, I did a video filming with a Sony camera, but I should use instrument in NASA module, but it's made by Japanese, and I used the channel of the NASA, and I carried out so many experiments in ATV. It's made of European, so it was really, really mixed. I cannot make some kind of category. All are mixed in the space. So I realized that we all together do something for space. And thank you, and then I think I can say some other things later. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your invitation. My name is Chiaki Mukai from Japanese Space Agency, and I flew 2 times in the Space Shuttle program, and also I worked as a backup crew 2 times. And all of the missions are space life science, space laboratory type of mission. And my last assignment from NASA was the deputy mission scientist for STS-107, Columbia. The experiment went very well. Unfortunately, the Columbia didn't come back. So, but anyhow, I have been fascinated by utilizing the space environment, which is a microgravity environment, for many experiments. And also, the reason why I wanted to be an astronaut, I wanted to go to space, was that I really wanted to see our home planet by my naked eyes. And also, since my background is medicine, I'm very much interested in the physiology and also the any kind of utilization programs, including education, etc. So my first flight was back in 1994, called International Microgravity, the second mission, which has around 100 experiments on board, quite a lot of international experiments working together. And the second mission was with Senator John Glenn, and also the first Spanish astronaut, Pedro Duque. And the second mission was also very much interested in it, because we are trying to find out the differences between difference and similarities between the aging process and the physiology. So I think I'm still fascinated by quite a lot of possibilities which gives us from the space environment. So that's why I'm very happy to be working for this program. Thank you.
So now, for those of you in the audience, if you have any questions that you want to ask an astronaut, somebody who will soon be an astronaut, somebody who's written books about astronauts, or somebody who looks at the medical necessities to see if you can even be an astronaut, please raise your hand and our microphone will come around to you.
Edmund Buckley from Scotland. Can you tell me how it felt the first few minutes back on Earth?
I think we have 4 probably different viewpoints on that, so why don't each of you just take 30 seconds. And what did it feel like when you came back to Earth?
First few minutes after you left.
I felt I was lead. I felt I was very heavy. I was sitting behind the pilot on my first return, holding a camcorder to film, to take a video of the entry through the front windshield. And every 10 seconds, I couldn't hold my arm. It was too heavy. And once I lay on my bed for the first time, that same day of landing, I had the feeling that I was making my bed like a U. I was lead, but in fact, I was just my weight normal.
Actually, the feeling after short duration and long duration flights are different, and as you can imagine, after long duration flight, your muscles get so used to weightlessness that it's really, you mention this gravity all the time. You see that everything is falling down, you have to put efforts to move everything up. But I think, and again, it's different from flight to flight, but I remember probably first feeling after landing is feel of relief of responsibility we had during our long flight.
Maybe all you guys know that I had a ballistic re-entry. So during I have a high G, my onboard document is too heavy. So just after landing, and then all stuff is falling on my face because I was down. So Peggy asked to me who is up and who is down. So I said, maybe I am down because all stuff's on my face. And then at the very after time, it was really surprising because just after landing, Yuri started to move and open the hatch and then get out of the Soyuz. It was really surprising. It doesn't take less than 10 minutes. And then he said to me, please try to get out of the Soyuz. And then I said to him, I can't because all the document is too heavy, because at the time I couldn't realize it. I just in the 1G. I feel like 8G or 9G. So, oh, it's too heavy. And then he said to me, no kidding, it's not that heavy. Yeah, it's not. So take off all the onboard document, and then he pulled me out. And then I'm taking off the Soyuz, and it was more ridiculous because so many people around us because they think we are alien or something. And then they stare at me, and then they stare at Yuri, and then but they cannot come to us because they feel a little afraid. So we can read their eyes. But after we taking a rest around the Soyuz, and then maybe they guess we are dead. So they come to us and then just started to touch, and then we move, and then they surprise and then get back already. So I think it was a really unique experience, and it was really fantastic. And then finally, I tried to talk them. I'm not an alien. I'm just an astronaut.
So being in space is wonderful. At the same time, coming back was also wonderful too. So after the orbit, everything started falling down. It was fascinating to see something start falling down because we have never seen everything falling down like something like that when we were in orbit. And then after the landing, I was so excited. Of course, first of all, I thought, oh, safely landed. Oh, I did it. This is my day, or something like that, I felt. And then after that, everything felt so heavy. like even the small size of the paper, I sensed the weight, like, oh my God, this paper actually has a weight. And I was so excited because thanks to the space flight, now I have a very special ability, even I can sense the weight of the small size of the paper. But of course, human body has a great adaptability to the new environment soon, so I lost that great potential to feel the paper size of the paper weight. So, but landing was exciting. That was so wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Christopher Lowe. I'm from England. Like many others, I'm sure, I'd like to be sitting where you are in a few years' time. My question to all of you, again, is before your first flight, if you'd have been told it was only going to be a one-way ticket, would you still have gone?
If it's one-way ticket? Oh, I got it. It's easy to. If it's one-way ticket, I would not go. I need round tickets.
If it's one-way ticket to rejoin my family who is already based on the moon or on Mars, yes, I go. But if it's a one-way ticket to go nowhere and die somewhere, no, I don't go.
Probably there are different view at this subject from professionals and non-professionals, because I know that some enthusiasts can say, well, send me to moon and I don't care if I return back. As professionals, we never think this way, because this is our job to make it not only for us, but for people who go after us. And if someone will fly with a one-way ticket, it probably wouldn't help us to develop this move.
That's right. Actually, I'm hesitating with the two options. And then first one is I'd better ask them to give me a round ticket, and then promise to them I will work hard and then I will give it back less of the money. Maybe it's a little cheaper than two one-way ticket. And second option is I'd better go to maybe really, really attractive guy and ask him to go there together. And then we will not get back.
Hello, my name is Sanjay Som from Geneva, Switzerland. My question is to Jean-François Clairvoy. You mentioned you were watching a movie on Mir. Could you tell us what it is and would you recommend it?
It was Outbreak with... And it was dubbed in Russian, but very hard to understand through the speakers, so I could read the English subtitles.
I have a question for the panel over here, as long as we're on the topic of movies. Have any of you watched Star Wars in Space?
No, but I would take the DVD if I was going for a long duration mission, yes.
Okay, good.
What about Dr. Swain?
More from the audience?
Yeah, hello. My name's Yolanta Edwards. You all speak English very well, but I wondered how you actually manage in terms of communication. Do you all have to learn English, and how do you go about maximizing the way you communicate amongst yourselves?
Okay, actually, my experience to fly on my first, as I said, international flight was flying with French cosmonaut, and he had to learn Russian language, and he spoke very well in Russian. My second flight was with British astronaut, and in the middle of the flight, Austrian astronaut came. So I would like to learn all languages of people I flew with, but unfortunately, in this case, I wouldn't have any time for training for spaceflight. So I think the tradition we had before was that hosting country will teach guests with their language. When I was training for shuttle flight, I had to learn not only English language, I had to learn NASA language because it's really different. I remember surprise of my friend when they came to Russia and saw a book of acronyms, not book, several pages of acronyms we use in our program. And I can understand how difficult it was to handle not only the language itself, but also all this special technical jargon. Then I faced exactly the same when I came to NASA and started to learn NASA jargon. But in flight, now for International Space Station, each of us study each other language. Americans study Russian language, we study English language. And among ourselves, of course, no one is perfect in each other language, but as a crew, I think we're close to be bilingual. So if ground tell us something and through static and noise on the station, you can't understand something in foreign language, then your partner will help you. And vice versa, if someone was told from Russian mission control and he did not understand, I can explain it to him. So as a crew, we were almost bilingual, but among ourselves, we spoke, we had another jargon word to speak Runglish, mixture of Russian and English language, and if I cannot find good word in English, then I can say Russian and my partner will understand, and vice versa. So we spoke a mixture of languages.
And if you are not neither Russian, neither American, then you need to be trilingual. Actually, in Europe, the position is very simple. English is a must in the astronaut selection, and once you are selected, you need to learn the other language. You need to learn both Russian and English well. All European astronauts master English and Russian because the only seats that are available for European astronauts to go in space today are either a seat on the space shuttle or a seat on the Soyuz.
Yes, at the very first time, I think it's unfair because we had 36,000 candidates that want to be an astronaut in Korea. And then in the middle of the test, we had an English exam and an English interview. So some of the candidates complain about that. Speaking English is really independent of the space flight. But our committee said to us, we had arranged to go to the space with the Russian Soyuz, so you should speak Russian. But in Korea, there's few people who can speak Russian, so we think about speaking English is a little potential to learn the Russian faster than others. So we should speak English well. But right now, I think it's also a very good chance because to fly to space, I should learn Russian. But right now, I can say that thanks to the space flight and then training, I can have a Russian. But unfortunately, after 6 months, maybe I forgot all of them. In Korea, I don't have to speak in Russian. But I totally agree with Sergey because it's a little different. Because I met the friends who is major in Russian language. And then they said to me some kind of words is really, really simple for them. And it's really some kind of like... they should know that if they learn the Russian, but I don't know because I learned the Russian in training center, so it's very specialized to the space flight. But sometimes I said some words in Russian, but they don't have any idea about that because it's really, really technical terminalized. And then it was one more ridiculous thing is that in GCTC, there's so many guys than women, right? So, but Russian language is a little different from Korean because they have a different ending of the language for the women and guys. So I always hear from the guys. So I imitate the guys' words. So some friends of mine in Russia, in Moscow, they said to me, you talked in Russian like a military guys. So, so always when I understand, I answered like that. I should have said, "Ya panila." No, but I always said that, Japonia, like that. So it's very unique experience, and then I think for the space flight is one more option is the getting more language. Yeah.
Well, Japan also has the same situation. We have to learn both English and Russian, because those are basically the major rocket system that carry human beings.
Yeah, maybe we have to learn Chinese soon. But I have a small anecdote, technical anecdote. On my second space flight to Mir, I had taught to my American colleagues the cosmonaut song in Russian. And the plan was to sing that song before closing the hatch, before departure of the shuttle, of the orbiter from the Mir. And we forgot, we were too much moved. And as we stationed 400 feet away from Mir for a test of a rendezvous sensor, we realized, by the way, we forgot to sing the song. So we decided to sing through the radio that is on board Atlantis. And I have the recording. It's very poor quality, very bad. I mean, and I was explained on the ground that the U.S. The radio on board the U.S. space shuttle was designed for U.S. accent, spoken accent, the bandwidth, the bandwidth, and I was told this is why when you speak English and you have a strong accent that is not U.S., it may not go through well, and if you sing on top of that, that's even worse. And for the ISS, the design of the bandwidth for the radio communication has been designed on purpose to accommodate accent from other partners of ISS, more than, not just US, but also Russian, Japanese, European.
And maybe a few words more about languages. It seems like it would be easier to make one single language spoken on the station. But what we found when we start preparing actually to our first mission, that sometimes to have two different languages is not because of the pride of each country or pride of crew members to use own language. It has very big technical reason. Like if you fly on Soyuz, all procedures, not only procedures, libraries of technical books are written in Russian. So if you start to translate it, this is a very high probability of mistakes. So we decided that when we fly Soyuz, we speak Russian. When we fly shuttle, we speak English. On the station, we have a mixture of languages. But being able to read both languages, I remember, I think for this first assembly mission, I was asked, well, you're flying on shuttle, so you will be provided with English procedures. Do you want to have something translated to Russian or not? And I said, no, I don't want to, because sometimes if you have basic knowledge of the language, it's better if you read original text, rather than you have translation and you have mistakes in this translation. So for a while, probably we will stay with at least two languages. Maybe we need to learn other languages soon.
Thank you. We have time for probably two more questions. They're short questions.
Okay. Hello, I'm Jack Dove from England. My question is, with the short amount of time Virgin Galactic will offer during flights for weightlessness, 5 or 6 minutes, and it's, I've seen in many ways astronauts enjoy zero-G doing aerobatics or looking out the window. I mean, do the couple who plan to celebrate their honeymoon in space, will they be driven? Will they be driven by? Do you feel you'll be driven by the clock in any way, or do you already feel or do you already have some way planned out to enjoy either zero gravity, or do you feel to just
I think we're getting the general gist. Yes. It's wonderful to see the masterful United Kingdom understatement try to grapple with the concept in a public endeavor. I think that we might smooch, but I think the main point is just enjoying the view. But my wife can provide her own answer. That was a pretty short question.
Go ahead. Thank you, George.
Okay. My name is Yuki Takahashi from Berkeley, California. I have a somewhat related question. First, to the experienced astronauts. If you have any advice for people like George, Loretta, and many of us who may only have a few minutes in space, and if you, George, Loretta, have any response to their advice.
Any advice for us first-timers?
I would say the view of the Earth first. Take pictures and video, because that's the only thing that remains after to share with friends or to remember. As you see the picture, you remember, yes, I remember I was there. This happens when we are there. We are flying over such places. So take pictures and share music. If you can wear, some good music that you listen as you look at the Earth, same for both. Music is important. And it's only after my first flight that I was told that we can actually have small loudspeakers, so you don't need to have your earpiece all the time to have music with you. But it's nice to hear some music you like when you work hard or when you just eat and look at the window.
My advice would be try to enjoy the flight, and actually remember that the excitement starts not when weightlessness starts. It starts long before you take off the ground. So try to enjoy everything, including training, preparation to the flight, and flight itself, of course.
My recommendation is to feel gravity. Actually, in space, no gravity, and then come back, gravity. So that is the one that, of course, other than you can see the beautiful home planet. So the gravity issue and also the CD, the Earth, is the one that I really would like to recommend.
Yeah, okay. I totally agree with Jean Francis, because all the instructors said to me, don't be shy to ask to take a photo to other astronauts. But actually, in ISS, sometimes I'm hesitate to ask other people to take a photo of me because they look so busy. But until now, I regret sometimes because I should have taken a photo in some place. But at the time, I'm afraid to ask because they look so busy. But I should ask because I should have that photo. So please. I don't think it will not be a reason to fight each other. So please ask anytime if you want to make a memory, you should take a photo.
Thank you.
Maybe one more thing is take a small radio recorder, MP3 recorder, and keep it recording on all the time and talk. Express yourself also verbally as you are experiencing this flight and from the launch, like Sergei says, because the sense of power when you launch is a strong feeling. Maybe not as strong for suborbital that orbital, but when the rocket engine will ignite, you will feel it, and you should say, you should say something and record it.
That's great. Thank you very much. We'll do one last question. There's somebody sitting down way in the back. The person just raised his hand. I've seen you raise your hand about 5 times, and they never got back to you. So we're going to take that, and I believe there's another plenary session right after this in here, so we're going to have to wrap up. Yes.
Itumeleng Makoloi from South Africa, Department of Science and Technology. Just to the astronaut, I just want to ask one question. Did you have to overcome any medical problems before your missions? Second, it's have you had? Some of you have had, this mission several times. After coming back, did you develop any kind of medical conditions or problems?
During the selection process of the first Korean astronaut, we should have so many medical examinations before select final people. And then at the time, I realized that in the world, wow, there is maybe over 30 or 50 medical examination. So at the time, some doctors said to the candidate, it's really, really okay, but it's maybe will be a problem for the space flight. The kind of comment they said to some of the candidate. And then sometimes they said to me, it will not be any problem for the space flight or for your normal life, but you have some kind of like defect on your some kind of place. So I also waiting for that kind of comments from doctor, but for 1 week for staying in hospital, no doctor said to me, you have some defect or you have some problem on my body. So thank God. And then I should appreciate to my parents because I'm totally healthy. So many times in my school time, all my friends around me said to me, you are so heavy, you are so fat, and you are so healthy like that. But I couldn't believe that. But after that kind of selection process, I should believe I'm so healthy. And then I have one more weird medical problem in my mind or in my body, because whenever I went to the hiking with my friends and then camping, I have no motion sickness in my bus and then train. But whenever I have a business trip, I always have a motion sickness in airplane, in train, in bus. So actually, when I had a motion sickness test in GCTC, all the doctors said to me, it's maybe will be a problem for your space flight because you are so weak in a motion sickness. So they expect that you will not be in a chair more than 2 minutes, spinning chair more than 2 minutes. So I really was. But in Kazakhstan, in Baikonur, I sit on the chair. I keep in the more than 10 minutes. It's amazing because to go to the space, I should sustain more than 10 minutes. So still I have selective that kind of motion sickness for the trip. I don't have, but for the work, still I have.
See, you should not look at this flight as a business trip, it's more for fun.
Yeah, maybe I thought, if I thought it's a business trip, I should have motion sickness more severe. So all the doctors estimate that I will have a motion sickness more than 3 days. But actually, I had less than 2 days, so I think it's not a business trip.
You know that actually, since my background is medicine, so I have to clarify the question that you addressed. Like, I think this issue is much better explained by the Melchior. But situation is, you know that the disease-like situation that all astronaut, cosmonaut may have is different from the disease or, the medical problem. I don't know if you are asking the medical problems that will prevent us to pass the criteria or not. Basically, astronaut, we need to pass the space shuttle situation, class 2 or class 3 medical exam. You don't need to be an athlete-like condition, like a lot of muscle, or you can maybe run 100 meters in certain duration or something like that. But you have to be very healthy. That is different from the situation that you will have, let's say, motion sickness or etc. Because motion sickness used to be said motion sickness, now it's said space adaptation syndrome. Like, for example, everybody, even if you say, I don't have jet lag, if we examine your body system, temperature is different, and also everybody should have some jet lag, more or less. Same, we are adapting to the Earth environment, so if we are launched in the different environment, our body needs to acclimate ourselves. So during that adaptation duration, it may develop some of the disease-like conditions, but it's not necessarily called it's a medical problem. So that's the situation I really would like to clarify.
Thank you.
I think you can add more since. Oh yeah,
yes. We do have to wrap up here, but I'd like to thank the audience for coming and thank you for the questions that you've asked our panelists, and thank you to Richard Brooke, who has put together this panel and is joining us again. Thank you very much for bringing everyone together.
Yes, let me add my sincere thanks to the whole panel. We really do appreciate such an entertaining couple of hours. You've done us proud. Thank you. Now, to the audience, we just have a short pause, and then Kelvin Long is going to deliver the final highlight lecture of this Congress, looking at interstellar drive and other future propulsion concepts. So hold on for just a moment or two, and we'll